All right, everybody, how's it going? We're gonna go ahead and get started. I'm gonna take my mask off. I'll wait. Hey everyone, thanks for coming today. My name is Gabriel Gadsden. I'm a second-year PhD student in the Applied Wildlife Ecology class, or lab rather, and a member of the BIOMES committee. Just to remind everyone, BIOMES stands for Bridging Issues and Optimizing Methods in Environmental Science. It's a flagship seminar series hosted by the Dean's Office, led by students. We are always looking for new ideas, new speakers to come. So if you guys have ideas, make sure that you bring them towards the BIOMES committee. If you want to be a part of it, we're looking for people. So come join us on Fridays at noon. Really quickly, we're going to have Q&A session at the end. Save your questions for then. People who are joining us via Zoom, there's a Q&A function, and you will be able to ask questions, and we'll be able to answer those as well. And with that, I'd like to do the introduction. So first, I will introduce Dr. Caren Cooper as an associate professor of public science at North Carolina State University. Her research focuses on avian responses to global change and inclusive practices in participatory sciences. She mentors graduate students pursuing degrees in fish, wildlife, and conservation biology and geospatial analytics. Her public science project, Crowd the Tap, investigates the safety of household drinking water through collaborations with high school teachers, public libraries, and faith communities, and is an author of 2 trade books about citizen science. Also with her today is Deja Perkins. Deja Perkins is a PhD student in geospatial analytics at NC State University with a background in urban ecology. Her research focuses on data gaps and inclusive practices within participatory sciences. While Deja's research takes a large-scale approach, she engages people in science and neighborhood nature through local bird walks in the southeastern and Midwest United States. Deja is also a co-founder of Black AF in STEM, a nonprofit organization driven to cultivate safe spaces, provide opportunities for Black people with outdoor STEM interests, as well as a co-organizer of Black Birders Week. Many of you probably have heard of that, 2020 through 2022. And in February 2022, Deja was recognized as an African-American STEM leader in North Carolina by Governor Roy Cooper. She has been featured in a variety of media, including Scientific American, Discover Magazine, LA Times, Bird Note Radio, and WTTW Chicago. And now we would like to thank both of them and give them a round of applause as they join the stage.
Thanks, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. We're unmasking. It's a metaphor. We're going to unmask about the participatory sciences. So we're here to talk about not just citizen science, but a range of participatory science approaches and about how we might transform those practices and perhaps the name itself to be equitable and inclusive. And let me just give you a little preview of what we're going to do, because we're going to rotate in talking. But I'll just give you a little overview, is that basically first we're going to kind of celebrate the successes of citizen science, and like in the context of this broader range of participatory sciences. And really what we hope to do is challenge you to think about the participatory sciences and citizen science in a way that basically boils down to, like, there's a lot of different typologies and ways to like think about all these approaches, but it kind of boils down to that they're ways to produce new knowledge through processes that either reproduce social inequities or disrupt those social inequities. And so hopefully we'll convince you of that. And then we'll go on to talk about some of the challenges that we face with the participatory sciences. And in particular, we'll focus on the fact that it's very segregated in terms of sociodemographics. And as you might imagine, that the styles of participatory science, often called citizen science, that tends to reproduce social inequities, is the participants are predominantly white, highly educated, almost STEM professionals. Anyway, and then we're going to go from there. We'll talk about sort of the consequences. We'll describe those patterns and the consequences. And we're going to go from there to give a sneak peek about what we're trying to do about it and some of the initiatives that we have really re-envision and reimagine and transform what's currently called citizen science to be an equitable and inclusive research practice. And my time is up. No, just kidding. But before we get started, we'll go ahead and we're going to just introduce ourselves a little bit more and let you get to know us a little bit. And we'll start with Deja. And, oh, it's here.
Hello, everyone. As Gabe so greatly introduced us, my name is Deja Perkins. I'm one of Caren's PhD students, and I'm a PhD student in geospatial analytics. But I'm also a birder. I'm a local bird guide, and I often like to classify myself as an urban ecologist, an educator, and a community connector. Now, why do I hold all these titles? Well, I think that's because as a researcher, as a scientist, I believe that my role is not just producing knowledge, but also connecting people with science and making sure that people are an integral part of the process of science and the way that we communicate our research to the public. And in that work, I have worked a lot in the southeastern United States and the Midwestern United States, introducing people to ways of monitoring their communities and their neighborhood nature through the use of apps and citizen science projects like eBird, and introducing them to the concept of monitoring their neighborhoods through bird watching. And bird watching is not only a hobby, but also a way to produce knowledge about our communities. And through that, I've partnered with a variety of organizations, including the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, Chicago Audubon Society, National Wildlife Federation, and local state governments and organizations within Raleigh.
Awesome. And I don't know how the Zoom is set up, but I just want to make sure when Deja stands over there, is she visible? Yeah, okay. All right, and then just a little bit about my lab as a way of introducing me, I guess. It's all my lab. I had a very circuitous route into academia and spent about 15 years at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, but as a researcher there before coming to NC State. And I've been faculty at NC State technically since 2019. Anyway, and I have currently, on the left there is my current lab, which includes 5 PhD students and a postdoc. The top 2 students there are ornithologists studying different birds. They're also, all my students are public scientists. This is a public science lab. They all do a lot of outward-facing work. Murray has a children's book series that'll start coming out next year. Lauren does a lot of commissioned writing, science writing. Danny is a postdoc in my lab, a social scientist. And then Bradley and Haley are also social science students studying the phenomenon of participatory science. Bradley's a science poet. He's a science poetry journal. You met Deja today. And then in the past, I've had master's students who each were running and developing citizen science projects on noise pollution, on managing house sparrows and detecting contaminants in their eggs, and then one that still continues, which is on water quality. But the hope from my lab and the students in it is that they all, when they earn their degrees and go out into the world, that they embody the principles of public science and really take their responsibilities and their seriously in terms of their obligations as researchers and scholars to serve a lot of different segments of society. Okay, and with that, we'll start. I don't remember where we started. Oh yeah, so I'm just going to introduce citizen science really briefly, which is to say that the phenomenon itself has been around a really long time, but it was in 2014 that this term was added as a new phrase in the Oxford English Dictionary, defined here: scientific work undertaken by members of the general public, meaning the lay public, often in collaboration with or under the direction of professional scientists and scientific institution, often, not always. So it was really this big sort of umbrella definition. And then the following year, here in the US, the US Competes Act added a new act to it, which is called the Citizen Science and Crowdsourcing Act of 2015. And basically that act gives the federal government permission basically to do citizen science, right? To rely on contributions of data and whatnot and more from people to engage the public. And it's not just data collection. You can hopefully see in that definition, it's like formulating research questions, refining project design, carrying out experiments, sharing data, like all kinds of things. Anyway, which is just to say that there was a lot of efforts done to legitimize and formalize this sort of practice. Oh, oops, I didn't realize that was animated. And that around that same time, 2014, is when the Citizen Science Association launched, and then subsequently in other years, there's been the European Citizen Science Association. Oh, in the US, the Federal Community of Practice for Crowdsourcing and Citizen Science. The Australian Citizen Science Association, Citizen Science Asia. There's a Citizen Science Africa Association, and RECAP is a participatory science, is what it's called, is the South American Association, which is all just to say there's like a lot of momentum and many different disciplines coming together to create this field of what's currently referred to as citizen science. And it encompasses a whole lot of different practices and disciplines. So first, we're going to shift now just to talk about some of the successes and sort of what this broad field looks like.
So I'm first going to start off by talking about some of the most popular, well, two of the most popular projects or most well-known projects out there. I think a lot of people within the ecology world have heard of eBird and iNaturalist, which are these two large projects, app-based and web-based projects that allow the public to contribute their sightings of birds, specifically with eBird, and other organisms with iNaturalist. And iNaturalist allows individuals to not only contribute their observations, but it has this community that allows you to identify the organisms that you might not know, but are finding in your neighborhood. And while these are two of the most well-known projects, they are not the most highly contributed projects that exist. There are a wide range of different types of projects and fields that use participatory methods in order to create and produce data. And so another example is from the amateur astronomers, and I don't remember her name.
Oh, yeah, Ginny McCormick.
Ginny McCormick, she has contributed to a lot of astronomy data, and she has helped to produce over 50 publications, including some within science. And so her regular 9-to-5 job is not her being a scientist. Her 9-to-5 job is something else. But from 5 to 9, well, not 5 to 9, but the other 9 to 5 hours of the day, she's staring up at the stars, and on the cloudless days, she's collecting that data that's helping to contribute to astronomy, the greater field of astronomy. But then there are also weather monitors. And so this individual on the right here, he has been contributing to precipitation data throughout his entire life. So from 18 to 103, when he unfortunately passed, he has been contributing daily precipitation data. And so that's the kind of work that can be done with participatory methods. But then we also have projects that can be embedded within games. And so Philo actually has some of the most participation that we see across projects, and that's because they have taken an innovative method of integrating this gene identifying game or process into the Borderlands 3 game. And so individually as a project, Philo was able to have 350,000 participation in 10 years. But when they decided to incorporate this project within a wider system of Borderlands 3, they were able to have 1 million participation, over 1 million individual accounts of participation within 3 months. And so that's the kind of expansion that's possible when using participatory methods. But we also have things, projects that are under the category of data donation. And so things like the American Gut Project, or what we might be more familiar with are projects like 23andMe. And so when we are maybe contributing data in one sense or trying to do things for our own purposes, like identifying our own ancestry, but then that data also gets sent over and analyzed within a broader project. You want to talk about data co-ops? No.
Oh, you or me?
Go ahead.
I can't remember when we switched.
Okay. So then we also have data co-ops. And so data co-ops are sort of like regular co-ops, but they are ways that people can collectively contribute and provide data.
And then, yeah, okay. Another area is participatory sensing. And like in many ways, we could call iNaturalist, taking photos, whatever, we could call that participatory sensing. Basically it's a subset of participatory sciences that relies on personal devices, typically phones, personal mobile devices, for sharing information. And so it's called sensing because it kind of comes from it's viewed basically as on-the-ground sensing devices that are used to complement like remote sensing devices, like from satellite imagery or something like that. And so we threw WYSE in there as an example too. Most people won't think of it as citizen science or anything like that, but it is a participatory sensing project in the sense that the way it works is that people's personal devices are sensing the environment. They're moving along with traffic or not. And so they're passive sensors. Like if you sign up for WYSE, when you select that terms of service and agree to it, your phone becomes a passive sensor, so that the satellites integrate it and can tell when traffic is flowing or not. And then there is a way to actively contribute too, where you can report and say, oh, there's a car accident here or a traffic jam there. So anyway, there's this whole sort of field of participatory sensing that approaches the same thing of what we call citizen science in many ways, but sort of almost from an Internet of Things kind of approach, where there's so many devices out there that are all interconnected, and how to either passively and or actively engage with those devices for addressing whatever problem is of interest. And then related to that is sort of the distributed, and you can click it, for distributed computing, which is another participatory approach of connecting a lot of devices, right? So some of the biggest like computational problems can't be solved anymore by like a single big mainframe. What has the strongest computing power is a network of small computers, phones, laptops, whatever, connected. And so like it started with SETI at home, which is search for extraterrestrial intelligence, but really where there's been the most use of distributed computing has been in biochemistry, and particularly with protein folding and trying to figure out like sort of these unique three-dimensional ways that proteins fold, and use that to address a lot of disease research. Anyway, the hobbyists that do this are called overclockers. They're guys like this that like invest in like having the biggest revved up computer imaginable. If people can't afford that, then often what they'll do is form teams. So like one of the teams that is, and then they compete, I guess is what I should say. So they do this in a very competitive sense, and they want to, like there's so much debate about like what counts as points and whatnot. But anyway, so sometimes teams form if people can't afford the high-powered devices. And one of the ones that's top of the charts is Brony at Home. I don't know if people are familiar with bronies. Do people know what bronies are? Some bronies they tend to be young men between the ages of like 16 and 21 who really, really sincerely love My Little Pony. And they like the animation, they like the music, they like the stories, whatever. So they're a fandom, just like Potterheads or Whovians. Anyway, so this fandom of bronies, they do their community service, and they're total like computer nerds. So anyway, they have a really large and effective distributed computing team. They contribute a lot to Rosetta at Home. I could go on about bronies, but I'll keep going. Just because we want to just say, like, there's such a variety of approaches. So participatory mapping is another type. Like you're probably familiar with OpenStreetMap, is a big infrastructure supporting participatory mapping and often community mapping, which they particularly do with their humanitarian side, the humanitarian OpenStreetMap, where within that there'll be other types of apps like MapSwipe, which is for mapping, I think like waste sites. They'll have others for mapping stormwater infrastructure, like all kinds of things related to disaster management, risk management, also sustainable development goals. So across the world, especially in the global south, these kinds of participatory and community mapping approaches are doing a lot for community development. Another participatory approach is participatory action research. And like an iconic example of this is where researchers work, like social science type researchers work very collaboratively with communities for the purpose of helping transform the communities and address problems. And a classic example is from the late 1990s from Caroline Wang with the development of photo voice. And so it's really a process by which researchers and communities come together and talk about problems, identify and really represent local knowledge, in this case through discussions around these photos. So this was about, most of her work was around women's health in rural China. And then, so just to draw the parallels, like participatory mapping is basically bringing people together to identify and represent local spatial knowledge. Participatory action research often relies on photos to bring people together around, through this photo process. And then like the digital humanities opens all that up. It's not always like quite so place-based or anything, but it includes transcribing old journals, creating new stories and narratives. So you go from like story maps and photo stories to actual narratives, written and oral narratives. And then I have just a couple more of this suite. And I hope people have heard of some of these, because this is more common in the US, community-based participatory research. It's kind of brought about this slogan of nothing about us without us is for us. There's different variants on that one. But, and this is, what I have here is an iconic example in North Carolina of some of the struggles that have happened around hog farms. There's more hogs in our state than people, and they don't have sewage treatment plants. This facility, each of those buildings houses thousands of hogs. They just pump the waste out into these, they call them lagoons. And then what they were doing was taking all that and spraying the waste onto the fields. You can see it's really green there. And then that would put particulates of urine and feces in the air, and it would blow onto neighboring towns. And actually, can you click it a little? I think it's animated. Through some community organizers, Gary Grant and Naimu Mohammed, worked with Steve Wing at UNC Public Health. You can click it one more time to see Steve. And they engaged communities. Well, they did a lot of GIS work. They did a lot of research and participatory approaches that basically showed the hog facilities, the CAFOs, are more likely than by chance to be next to poor Black rural communities in North Carolina. And so it is an example of environmental racism, and then their work showed the health effects of that through this process. And then one final example, also from North Carolina, is what's called community-owned and managed research. And Omega and Brenda Wilson sort of are the developers of this method, also with Steve Wing. And I don't know, I like this picture. Some might know Jacoby Wilson. That's him young. And basically, what Omega developed here was kind of the parallel of what he saw as institution or university-owned and managed research. And in all of those partnerships, even when it was community-based participatory research, in all of those partnerships, it was always putting the academic institution in the forefront and their needs and goals and them controlling the money. And he wanted to flip that model. And so his community-owned and managed research is where his community-based organization, or whatever community-based organization does this, is in charge of the funding, is in charge of the research, really directs everything with the community's goals in mind and what their needs and research interests are, rather than the academic interests being in the forefront. And the picture there relates to, a lot of what they did was related to basic amenities, like sewage and plumbing and sidewalks and stuff, like infrastructure, but also a lot of what they did related to, they battled the Department of Transportation all the time. This was just highway development and trying to protect churches, African-American churches, and those graveyards that are with those churches from being destroyed because of highway construction. And they won some and they lost some.
So now that we've taken this broad overview of the participatory methods, we're going to talk about the challenges and critiques of citizen science. And we're still talking about citizen science specifically because, as we've seen, there are so many different types of projects that span a variety of disciplines and a variety of structures that involve incorporating the public into our research. But with citizen science specifically, these more institution-driven approaches, there can be a lot of challenges that pop up even in the data. And so this one project, Project Riverwatch, which is occurring in Illinois, they did a demographic analysis of their participants where they wanted to see who was participating in their project in comparison to the broader landscape or the broader demographics of the Illinois region. And so what they found was that the majority of their participants are actually non-Hispanic white. And a very small portion of those are a very small portion of those are people of other ethnicities. However, when you look at the broader demographics of Illinois, you see that there is a wider variety of other ethnicities that are represented. And so they also did the same thing with investigating what types of degrees and that level of education that their participants have. And so what they found was that Riverwatch participants mostly have some sort of degree, whether that's a graduate, a professional degree, a bachelor's degree, or just some type of college, and very few that have less than a high school diploma. And the few that have a less than a high school diploma are probably high school students. Whereas the broader demographics of Illinois is much broader in their range of the level of education that individuals hold. And this is not something that we just see with water monitoring based projects. It's something that we see across citizen science projects. A really great example is that of the Audubon Christmas bird count. It's a very popular project that has been in existence since the 1900s. But, and it's actually the earliest, I believe the earliest known citizen science project. But one thing that, let me not tell lies. But one thing that my lab mate recently published, Bradley, is that 96% of Christmas bird count participants that were surveyed, 96% of those respondents are white. And even though there are so many participants within the Audubon Christmas bird count. But within this study, he also found that he studied multi-project participation and across-project participation. And one of the things that he found is that oftentimes individuals who participate in a single project, they will participate in another project as well. And so that also lowers or restricts the amount of participation that we think we might be getting as well. So instead of having this broad pool of participants, you often have the same individuals participating across multiple projects, whether that is projects of the same type. So sometimes people do the same type of outdoor-based projects, or they'll stick to computer-based projects. But in general, participants will participate in multiple projects, and so that lowers our demographic pool once again. And one of the things that we really want to emphasize is that citizen science does not equal community science, which I hope that you've been able to see through the variety of examples that we've given today. And so the types of projects that typically fall under that citizen science umbrella, they're typically larger scale, so geographically dispersed. They are focused primarily on a community of interest instead of a community of place. And they have massive participation, primarily focused on data collection, leisurely pursuit. A lot of those projects focus on nature conservation, but the main thing is that they are usually institution driven and more than likely have a goal of publishable science. Whereas community science projects, those are mostly local projects that are people driven, that are about a community of place, that have some type of face-to-face communication and interaction, that have people involved in the entirety of the scientific process. And these projects mostly focus on topics that are of interest to the community of place, so they're concern driven, and they often are resulting in actionable science and have themes of environmental justice. So these are just some of the examples of those two different types of projects, which really leads into some work that my advisor has done recently.
Yeah, this was a policy forum that we had in science last year, I guess it was, and it was really to address this trend of this problematic nature of the term citizen science, and I guess, and maybe we haven't really said it outright yet, but so like the issue with the term citizen science is the term citizen, or at least that's how most people's perception of the problem is that it's not inclusive, because it implies because there's so many people who face discrimination and different forms of oppression based on citizenship status. And so there's a push among practitioners to reconsider that name. And like Deja's saying, and the most common alternative is community science. And we wrote this piece to just point out that conundrum of that community science, and some of those examples that I gave at the end of community-based participatory research and community-owned and managed research and whatnot, that that is a very distinct practice that, and that co-opting that term and using it to describe these large-scale institution-driven practices was actually going to be harmful to authentic community science, to not be able to keep those distinctions. Anyway, and so, and then we also just talked about the need for inclusion work to go much deeper than simply a name change, because it was leaving a lot of work undone. Organizations were just, changing what they were calling it and not changing the practice itself. And so this is a preview because we haven't submitted this yet, but I'm gonna go ahead and share some results of what we're working on right now related to that paper, because we started to do a survey through Qualtrics, like a Qualtrics panel, to have a representative sample across the United States with extra sampling of groups who were Black, Hispanic, Asian, and Indigenous, people identifying in those areas. So anyway, I'm going to show a little bit from that. And I will say, so we presented people with 7 different terms, and we asked a bunch of questions about how descriptive the terms were, how inclusive the terms were, and their likelihood to engage with something called those terms. And now keep in mind, these are people who are in a panel, so they're like microtaskers. It's not Amazon Turks, but it's like that. They're being paid for every survey they take, and they're choosing to do science surveys, but they're typically not identifying as involved in any of these. But anyway, one of the main points here, we had a qualitative open-ended question that was super informative. And this was kind of embodied that response, which they said, I guess this is what nerds think about, because for the most part, people were, actually, can you click it? Because it's animated. Yeah. Most people were pretty neutral about all the terms, or at least about citizen science. You can see this is just a net favorability, like you might do for a president or something, like how many negatives and how many liked it and disliked it. Anyway, but you can see there was a little bit of a preference and seen as inclusion as the term community science, and a real dislike of the word crowdsourcing and kind of civic science. But community science and participatory research and a little bit less favor, but public science typically came in 3rd place. Anyway, but you can see this is just within that very small margin of error. This is going to 50%. Anyway, I'm going to show you a couple of more breaking this down by race that is just within that 20%. So we're really zooming in here. These are still really barely getting past 5% error. But what you can see is in terms of each of these kinds of dimensions by which we were measuring public perceptions of these terms, there just tended to be this like of the term community science and participatory research and a dislike of crowdsourcing. And the other terms, for the most part, kind of fell neutral. So, and what we can say from the qualitative work and combined with this was, there was actually overall, the other comments we would get was that it doesn't matter what preface you put, like adjective you put in front, it's the term science that's the most exclusive. Which is why we think people liked participatory research, although it doesn't explain why they really didn't like crowdsourcing. Anyway, and this is the same dimensions of measuring those terms broken up by citizenship status. And actually, if you go back one, there's one thing I wanted to point out here, which was, it's really hard to see it, sorry, but so there was white, Asian, Hispanic, and Black respondents. And actually those who had the strongest opinions about these terms were our Asian respondents and our white respondents. And one of the reasons we did this survey with this focus was to try to elevate the voices of people who have currently not been heard in this discussion that's happening within our field, which are basically people who are currently not participating in these for the most part, and also different people of color. Anyway, and then by citizenship status, though, there was people who were non-citizens, and that was mostly Asian respondents, did have the strongest opinions about these terms. But again, they still weren't strong opinions. They were just a little bit not neutral. I'm
sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I was gonna say, so anyway, what we're doing next is basically coming up with kind of we're not going to be prescriptive about what terms we should use in this field. We're going to continue to caution about not co-opting the term community science, but we're coming up with sort of a framework to guide people to balance their values while incorporating the input from people who are currently excluded from the process to make their best decisions that they can. Go ahead.
So another element to this survey was that we wanted to examine what are some of the barriers to participation. So we asked a series of questions of things like, these don't align with my values, I fear the negative consequences, I lack support, there's a lack of diversity, the participating isn't really fun for me, science activities won't help me address the problems that I care about, it's not designed for people like me, I don't feel welcome, I'm not interested in doing science activities, the participation won't make a difference, there are no skills or ability to do science well. I don't have people to participate with me, so more of that community aspect. Lacking the free time to, lacking the free time to participate, not being aware of opportunities, never being invited, no access, and lacking training, the costs being too high, and lacking technological resources. So within these questions were embedded within that original survey, and we conducted a factor analysis to really group these variables together and determine what we've determined as personal as well as structural barriers. So things that are, personal, things that are preventing people within their personal life from participating. So things like not aligning with your personal values, not thinking that science is fun, not feeling welcome or lacking the free time. Those are all personal things that a project can't really control. Versus structural barriers, things like not being aware of the opportunities, no access, lacking training, or the cost and lacking the technological resources. Those are things that projects can control. So those are more so structural barriers. And so again, we broke down those barriers by race. And we found that individuals who identified as white had lower both structural and personal barriers than all other ethnicities. And then when we broke that down by citizenship status, we also saw that citizens perceive fewer barriers than non-citizens as well. And so why does this matter? Why does this whole concept of who participates? Why do we need to have more inclusive practices? Well, it's because location matters. If you think about this data that people are collecting, we're really collecting data about place. So this data is spatial in nature. And so this is some of the research that I completed within my master's, examining the difference between a semi-structured project of eBird compared to a more structured protocols of local bird counts in 3 cities of Tucson, Fresno, and the Triangle of North Carolina. And so within these 2 maps, we're looking here at the city of Tucson, and we really want to pay attention to the areas that's outlined in black. I know it might be a little hard to see, but so here we have eBird points, and then we have the more structured protocol of the Tucson bird count. And right off the bat, you can just see that there are way more points and way more coverage in the Tucson bird count in comparison to eBird, which allows people to choose when and where they participate. So there really isn't much structure within eBird aside from collecting information on effort. But another thing that I want you to pay attention to is that these are bivariate maps. And so these areas that are really light gray, almost white in color, these are areas where we have no data at all. And then areas that are darker in green have high wealth, areas darker in purple have higher richness. And then those areas that are kind of that darker gray have both high wealth and high richness. And then the medium colors have some type of medium combination of them all. And so this black outline, it really shows the outline of the city of Tucson. And so within those outline areas, you can see that, well, one, a lot of the points are outside of the city limits. And then within the city limits, we really just don't have any data in some of those smaller census tracts, which are more urban census tracts. And we have areas of high wealth and high richness in those larger, more rural tracts. And so what does that mean for people? It means that we're not collecting data in a lot of these places. So when we use methods like eBird to conduct our analysis, we're really already getting a biased picture. And so that leads us to the racial spatial gap. So my thesis work primarily focused on those 3 cities, but we've also been conducting a nationwide analysis looking at eBird nationwide and comparing the proportion of tracks with at least one observation and the percent BIPOC within those areas. And one thing that's really striking is that these areas that are majority BIPOC, so 80 to 100%, have far less tracks with observations, and this is just having at least one observation within the entire tract. And tracks that are more white, they have the most observations. And so really, basically that means that the less BIPOC a tract is, the more likely it is to have observations. And so what does this mean for other things that we study, like the luxury effect? It means that when we have this biased sampling, we really can't even detect the luxury effect because we're not collecting data from those lower income areas. We're oversampling high income areas and we're excluding low income areas from the picture altogether, which means we're also excluding the environment and the people that live in those low income areas as well. Another recent project that we've been working on, we just recently co-authored a paper with some of our collaborators from other institutions called Mapping for Whom? Communities of Color and the Citizen Science Gap. And so this project really took a look at a project called COCO-ROS, which is the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network, which focuses on precipitation. And so these these gauges are place-based, and they really help us identify exactly where participation is occurring. And so we really pinpointed 2 locations. One, the city of Baltimore, because it has a very distinct, high, large BIPOC population. And so here we have the black butterfly here, we're a majority Black population. And you can see there's very few rain gauges at all within this butterfly area. And so the areas that primarily have rain gauges are areas that are less than 60% BIPOC. And then when we look at the city of Portland, we see a very similar picture where there are only 5 tracks that are over 60% BIPOC, and none of them have rain gauges. And so it's really a telling story about how we are, whose picture we're painting when we're collecting this data and we're making our assumptions and we're producing knowledge. And so I know we're running out of time, but we hope to talk about new directions and how we want to move towards a more ideal future.
And yeah, so just a little preview of it. So there's an initiative that I started with colleagues here, colleagues Chris Hahn, Valerie Johnson, and Monica Ramirez Andriota, along with Deja, with initial funding from the NSF. And it's called, we call it Ideal Participatory Science, and that stands for Inclusive, Diverse, Equitable, Accessible, Large-Scale Participatory Science. And and those were all of our colleagues as part of this working group. And you probably are familiar with most of these terms. And the one I want to emphasize is the L, which is the large scaleness, because if we were to look at all those participatory sciences that we were talking about, a lot of the community and local work and those practices often tend to be inclusive and diverse and equitable and accessible. But really, it's what we see is that the large-scale participatory sciences, what's typically called citizen science, really faces it has so much power behind it of what we can learn and accomplish, but it really is failing to be inclusive and equitable and diverse. So our working group has been putting together guidance, you could say, based on this concept of centering in the margins. Right, and so our theory of change basically starts with personal change and a lot of reflections about positionality and relationality. And this is for project leadership teams, right? So these are for big institutions running large-scale projects to really be reflecting on their social identities, lived experiences, assumptions and beliefs, and institutions and the power dynamics that are held within that. To learn how to do diversity audits and really understand who is participating in their projects and who is missing. And then to really move to make projects inclusive, to understand that the projects need to change. That it's not people who we want to come and assimilate into our projects, that really we want projects to change and be in service to more people. And so we have a whole menu or recipes that projects will be able to pick and choose and see what works best for them that relate to project change, whether it's related to representation and having participant advisory boards, whether it's related to prioritizations and actually reordering research priorities, shifting project narratives from a dominant white culture narrative to other cultural narratives, a whole lot of things, to this process of localization and maybe having projects function as tools that have local uses and not just sort of a large scale use, kind of a data co-op model, and to really incorporating reciprocity. And I'll just give one example of that related to governance. And right now, the core aspect of citizen science is that there's a lot of people that share their observations, their data to a central person, which I'm going to say that's with the left, that's centralized control. That's the default. And what happens is that because the data are shared to that person or that project team, they are making decisions about how the data get used and reused. They decide whether it gets licensed in Creative Commons or not, or whatever happens to it. Anyway, and so looking at data governance, for example, there's other ways where we can diffuse that control, whether it's through shared control, where a participant advisory board, like I mentioned, or other ways where you have representatives from different groups. And this isn't just, racial or citizenship, it could be a lot of different ways relevant to that project. Like my water quality project, I want to hear from participants who own homes, and I want to hear from people who rent their homes, because those are very different interests that need to inform the structure of my project and how our really sensitive data are shared. All the way to individualized control. That's okay. Which is really just a data donation model where everyone retains control of the use and reuse of their data, even though it goes to a central repository. And we're going to be pilot testing these with some new funds with these two projects, NemoNet, which is like a game, and City Nature Challenge, which uses the iNat app. They're going to be our brave pilot testers.
So we really just wanted to end this presentation with really a call to action and pushing for change, and that seeing as that if you all decide to use participatory methods in your research, we're hoping that you think more so about how you can be inclusive, diverse, equitable, and accessible, and maybe even large scale within your work. And really to get you to think about, what does it mean for us as scientists? What is our role and responsibility to the public in the work that we do, right? As scientists, we are in service to society. We are creating knowledge for whom? For the public. And so with that, I challenge you all to kind of go home and think about that and how that applies to your own individual research, and how you can incorporate the public into your work, and how you can really think about making sure that everyone's voices are heard within your work. And with that, I'll say thank you.
Thank you. Oh, okay.
Hey, everyone. Thank you for coming. Really quickly, we don't have any time for questions. Dr. Cooper and Deja will be around this afternoon if you guys want to ask some questions as the class is coming in. Track them down. And we have some spots available for dinner as well. So if you want to, I think it's 1 or 2 spots available. Please reach out to me. Yeah.
We're going to a fancy place.
Yeah, so coming up. Thank you.
Oh, see, I was looking here, and I thought we ended like, but we started late.
It's okay. I think that's the idea is that.
Oh. I grew up in Chapel Hill.